All right, so if my theory is right, and I think my theory is very much right, these here are Dakota burial mounds. And the mounds that you saw in the video prior to this, I'm hoping this is kind of like an introduction to my archaeology playlist.
Turn left.
Okay, Siri. Siri, stop. We're already here. Siri, stop navigating. All right, so it's kind of funny. But yeah, like I've been here before. This is back when I was in college. I think I brought some of my friends out to those what I thought were burial mounds. Glenn McNamara doesn't think they are. He thinks that they're glacier
Proceed
made.
to the route.
And yeah, so I'm pretty sure they're not, man. And like if we have actual like historic like record of the fact that in these very places, due to 19th century development, 31 of these mounds were dug up. A bunch of people basically grave robbed the Dakota and apparently some other tribes, dude. Like before the Dakota were the Dakota. Think about how 2,000 years of history can change, right? Can change languages. I mean, English wasn't really the English we know of like 1,000 years ago. Like looking at the Tale of Beowulf, guys, if you remember that playlist that I went through, like old English, dude, you could barely recognize it. Like you could see that it was a rudimentary form of English, but like 2,500 years ago were the Dakota's ancient ancestors, man. Look at that. Gang signs and all that. But dude, look at this view. Wow. Straight down the Mississippi to Hastings. Historic Hastings. Right there you got the Mississippi River. And right there you have for sure a Native American burial mound. Let's get a better angle of it from this side. Right there. One of 6 remaining, guys. I'm gonna keep talking to you. Stay with me on the video here because it reminds me of the time we went to Bear Butte out in the sacred origins of the Dakota. So, you know, the Dakota say that that's where they came from, is from the caves of the Black Hills. That's where their origin stories form. And they became so great and they followed the buffalo so many miles, guys. Like I've driven that in my Jeep right over there. Basically the whole extent of Dakota country, Dakota nation, Dakota territory. And so these are basically the borderlands of the nation, because like the Menominee people and the people from, you know, like across the Mississippi River on the other side of it, down by the St. Croix, like that was like borderlands or fighting lands. Like your warriors would be on the edges. Think about it, the edges of your territory. You don't need warriors inland where nations can't get you. You have your warriors, your soldiers back in ancient times before nukes and missiles and far off fighting, you know, like aerial power. You would send your warriors from the Black Hills all the way out to Montana to fight the Crow. Or you'd send your strong braves, your strong warriors all the way out on the edge of this place called to the Dakota. Well, nowadays they have to call it St. Paul and Hastings because of Viking invaders like my ancestors. But yeah, like you'd send your warriors to a place like right here to make sure the frickin' Menominee people don't come over and rape your children and kill your daughters and try and make them your slaves, or like, you know, like there's bad things going on in native times as well. And the reason I love the Dakota so much, guys, I really do, is when you look at their religion, guys, like it was basically knowing the Creator before the Creator revealed his Son through the Jews. The Dakota were a holy nation. I'm not even kidding you guys. And so like you look at these places, you come here And yeah, like, it'd be awesome to dig up these burial mounds, and they did back in the 19th century. Archaeologists probably who look like me and look like the real Indiana Jones. I mean, look, you got the capital right there of St. Paul. When they developed the neighborhoods, they took out 31 of these and found actual native artifacts. That's why these are called, I don't even like the fact that they call them Indian mounds. These are Dakota sacred burial mounds, guys. And yeah, it would be such an honor. Such an honor to have a Dakota wife. A noble people. A noble tribe. But yeah. 2,500 years ago, in that time, that's when they date these mounds, right? In that time, like, the Jews were still living in Israel, in their homeland. The first revolt of the Maccabees hadn't happened yet. The Romans hadn't even conquered Israel. Before that, Alexander and his Greek army conquered the ancient world. And then when Rome took over and took power, you have what, a lot of people now see as like white society conquering the world. And, it's obviously not fun to be conquered. And the Jews were conquered many times. Why would God Almighty have his own people be conquered? It's interesting, sometimes it was because they disobeyed him, they rebelled against him, and God let the Babylonians kill them. And other times it was because of famine, like God had them be slaves in Egypt to the Egyptians, a very mighty nation, obviously, that didn't just build mounds, they built pyramids, and potentially with the help of some ancient aliens. Not my friends, demons. I hate them.
At the stop sign, turn left onto Earl Street. Then take the first left onto Thorn Street.
Like the whole AI thing, you know what I mean? Like, I definitely see how that's definitely connected to some potential alien activity in the future with the whole 666 mark and the goddamned future government with Satan and his Antichrist taking over. But yeah, like 2,500 years ago, the Jews were still living in their ancestral homeland in peace. Without a Messiah, without a Christ, just with kind of the same simple, humble faith of the Dakota. They believed in one creator God. They believed in Mother Earth. And the Great Spirit.
Proceed to the route.
The Great Spirit, the Great Wakan. They were a humble, peaceful people living off the land and nature and the buffalo. And their warriors guarded their borderlands so that nobody could have access to the buffalo and their people could be safe. They were sacred people. They were protectors of the buffalo. And they're still here, thank God. Thank Jesus. So here's more of the history on this place. If you want to read it for yourself and come here, you can. I'm going to try and keep this video just to 10 minutes. Ise wikasata, which pika woyuhi, hina oyakate toka o hodapi sni. I was reading that first line. Archaeologist. Dena pahipi ka dena wasiptapai asinpi sni ehan tanhan de pipika dena wa sastapi awasinpi sin ehan tanhan de Hisitu, Kisimpi, Wakantuya. I think that's the name of Great Spirit, Great God. Wakantuya. Wustode ye tika pazo enaka ti takun wo wakan wa kahapi ka wu kanige hina hodapi sini vine de Deloria Jr. Ka Wikota de na Oyapi ka Yak Tokapi Kite Kinip Sinipi de na Hiktu Sini Ka Wotkayuya Wotakuya, Iyok Pipi, Sni, He, Oyak Pi, Kete, Snipi. There are many orthographies in development and in use by the Oseti Sakowin. This translation uses the University of Minnesota orthography. No, I could read that one too. The graves and cultural items of the original people of this continent have not always been properly respected and treated with dignity by American society. Archaeologists and others collected the remains and burial items of the original people in a disregard for their human rights. Disinterring tribal ancestors was historically allowed in the name of science. Academic institutions and museums lack sensitivity for spiritual practices, burial rites, and beliefs of the original people. The prominent attorney and writer for the Oseti Sakwin, Vine Deloria Jr., and other indigenous thought leaders brought attention to this issue. They advocated for change by bringing notice to the double standard that existed in American society regarding indigenous burials, and noted the harms that living relatives endured due to the mistreatment of the resting relatives. The resting relatives endured due to the mistreatment of the resting places of their ancestors. So that's repeated twice, actually, written. This conflict between archaeologists, academic institutions, museums, and tribal nations was addressed through the NAGPRA. These laws are a result of those individuals and tribal nations who protested the mistreatment of their dead and the removal of cultural items they were buried with. NAGPRA was enacted in 1990 to provide guidelines for the protection of the cultural and human remains of the ancestors. While the intent for NAGPRA is to repair past harms, hundreds of thousands of human remains and artifacts stolen from burial sites remain in the hands of museums and institutions across the country and the world. Just like out in DC. Now, a lot of people, natives included, a lot of my friends, are mad about that. Like, mad about, what happened to their ancestors. And it's like, I'm mad that, like Rome killed a lot of my ancestors in Germany and cut off their heads for basically having a sacred tree and not worshiping Jesus Christ. Like, that's something that happened down there. But, if somebody were to go dig up my ancient German ancestors and show me Yuletide treasure, I'd be like, dude, that's sweet. Like, that's awesome. Like, there's like a healthy balance of both, like not disturbing the dead and then also learning from them. So, yeah. My respect to the Dakota, and Mayday Wakan, like the great Wakan. Like, so Mayday is great, Wakan is spirit. My respect truly to the Great Spirit and to the people of the Dakota. And whatever potentially I do find arrowheads, I'm not going to be digging up anything in these mountains. But if you find arrowheads and atlatls and tomahawk heads and spearheads, dude, like that stuff is so awesome. And like I said, if my theory is correct, and I think it is, I think it's right. These mounds on the edges of the Mississippi, this is like where border battles happened between tribes that didn't dwell at peace together, guys. And so you can find in probably woods and other places, you know, like, where do you bury your enemy dead? Like I said, you know, and that's a interesting question. A lot of the times men would scalp the other natives. Like when a warrior conquered another warrior who was native, they would scalp their head, showing like, you know, and they give war whoops. Like, you can actually hear it, guys. Like, they did it to Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, you know? And bro, it's so intense. Like, imagine going with your best buddies to the borderlands where the Menominee dwell, these freaking fierce fighters. The one we were at that waterfall showed how the first white settlers that came to that area to try and settle were killed by the native chief. Strong, mighty dude. And yeah, eventually they got pushed back. And the Dakota are so awesome because it's like they actually like fought back against the white man and like actually survived. Some of the tribes further east don't even exist anymore. They don't even have ancestors or a people because, you know, like, it took years for white people to settle, and then eventually they got, you know, killed off or bred out, or like, it's just like there is not really much for certain tribes out east. And like, for the Dakota to retain their cultural identity, their cultural language, their way of life, I mean, it's just amazing. And I believe in sovereignty, like native sovereignty and God's sovereignty through the natives. Jesus still is the Christ, and he's still the only way the Dakota are going to be in the Creator's heaven. It's through the Chaska of Wakan, which is Jesus Christ, that every single soul will be saved.
Proceed to the route.
That believes. So they must repent, they must believe, and I want them to live forever. And many of them will. But going back to the mounds and the mound sizes, like, these are they're big mounds. Obviously you can totally see like they're rounded and undisturbed. And yes, they have that like round crescent, but these are small relatively. When you think about burial mounds, like, this would take me and my crew, right? Like, I'm not talking with modern equipment, to make a mound like this to honor, you know, 50 or 5 dead, a family of dead natives, like one family burial ground, another family burial ground. That would take a couple weeks, maybe less. The bigger mounds, I'm telling you, the bigger the mounds, the greater the honor. And that one out in Hastings, I'm telling you guys, it's huge. Like, it's like exercise to get to the top of it. Imagine a great war chief who died so bravely in battle with such an awesome story that like thousands of different natives from inland came to like bury this dude in Hastings, and like nobody was to touch it, nobody was to like disrespect it. It's like basically the Vikings version of Beowulf, their ancient ancestor. Like, nobody was to touch his mound or touch his treasure, but basically because he died, many of the other foreign Norse nations, the Swedes, were gonna attack the Geats, and the Norwegians were gonna attack the Geats because they lost their beloved prince warrior. Like, dude, seriously, imagine the story that is lost to the greatest, potentially the greatest warrior burial mound of the natives. Like, I've been out to Arlington with my dad, right? The Arlington National Cemetery is where the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is, right? And like, they guard that night and day with guns that would like kill somebody if they tried to disrespect it. The Dakota had that potentially same thing. But when white people came into their land, they came with more guns, more power than they at the time had themselves. I mean, some of them got some guns from the French, but you can't take on as many people, right? Like with primitive weapons. You can do it, but you're going to lose a lot of warriors in the process. And so I do think that potentially, like, one of their ancient tombs that they guarded with their lives, with bows and arrows and tomahawks and knives and spears and shields, like, they had to, like, let it go. Like, hey, they don't know about it, we'll come back and get it later, kind of thing. That's how I see it. So I know it's double the time I said, but I got a lot to say about it, to be honest with you. And hopefully you love listening to it. If you actually do, it's because you're like me and you love archaeology. You liked movies like Indiana Jones, you like Jurassic Park, all those things. And this is basically living speculation and living in history and trying to understand it for what it is. And so, yeah, you know, the native burial mounds, and, like, imagine if, like, you know, Abraham Lincoln or Donald Trump, right? Those are two Republican presidents that I respect. I don't fully respect Abraham Lincoln's decision to kill and hang 38 native men in Mankato, the biggest execution of anyone or any people in U.S. history, for brave Dakota men that basically were trying to stand up for their rights to live and exist in their land. After Alexander Ramsey, our stupid dumbass state governor, was, you know, basically lying to them and taking advantage of them and not giving what they needed. I know we were having a civil war at the time, but, like, you can't let the people eat grass, all right? Like, that's not how you take care of people, okay? And I love Native Americans. I would fight and die with them if I had to. That's how much I love them and how much I respect them. And, you know, I'm pretty sure our Norse ancestors fought the Dakota because, you know, to me, the other archaeology that we were doing up at the Alexandria Viking Museum and the runestone up there, I don't think that's a hoax. I think Crusaders and Knights Templar took Norsemen, right, that were Christian Vikings. And I'm pretty sure, you know, the Vikings of the past may have gotten all the way to, like, you know, the Great Lakes and met the tribes like the Oneida and the peaceful, like, you know, water-dwelling tribes, and probably made trade with them, maybe even conquered some of them or fought some of them. But yeah, like, when any person comes on Dakota territory, the Dakota were very warlike and very protect our own, you know? And yeah, like, the 10 men red with blood found up nigh Alexandria. What's interesting about that place too is, like, when I was at that farm and I found the site where the Kensington rune stone was left, there, just north of there, is like this ski place, you know what I mean? It's this big mountain, or, like, not mountain, but, like, hill. And if you look at it, it's like, well, how did that just kind of form? Was that built? Is that a mound? I also look at, you know, places like Buck Hill, right, in Burnsville, right next to Crystal Lake. If I'm a native chief, I want to live on that hill, you know? And potentially it is just a natural formed hill, but, like, with man-made additions, you know? Like, when you don't have bobcats and excavators, you have people with baskets carrying huge amounts of dirt day after day. Eventually you're going to get pretty high up, you know what I'm saying? And whoever you buried way back, like 100 years ago or even 500 years ago, like, they're still down there. And, like, you ain't getting down there unless you start re-digging up what you already, you know, have laid and patted down and danced down. You know, like, when you dance at a powwow, in my opinion, you want to dance on the top of the hill. You don't want to dance on the ground. You want to dance where you can see all the land. The best and most lit powwow is the one where you can see a awesome view, you know what I mean? Not just native girls, but, like, native lands, So, yeah. If somebody like Abraham Lincoln or Donald Trump died, we would greatly honor and exonerate their burial place. I've been down to Lincoln's grave. It's the, I think, second or third most visited grave in the world, obviously behind Jesus Christ's, or what they think is Jesus Christ's, in Jerusalem. Imagine somebody of that importance to the Dakota. And so obviously it's locked, and I don't want to disturb the sacred grounds, but that's what it looks like, man. I think this video is long enough and you have enough to think about now yourself. The sacred river, where the two rivers meet, was spiritual sacred ground to the Dakota. So honestly, if you wanted to try and do some archaeology around Fort Snelling, that'd be a good place. Down by Hastings, that's like borderland. So like you might find arrowheads, and like war arrowheads, not just hunting arrowheads, like straight up, like, all right, river battles and crossing the river. Like imagine crossing the river on kayaks to try and take territory or take land, or you know, like every warrior fights for his own glory and pride in some senses, and some for God and some for their own vanity. And you know, crossing the river meant being a man in some senses. It's your time to fight. It's your time to see what you got and see what you're made of, or get scalped, you know, like that kind of thing. Like that's how they fought 2,500 years ago. You know, what does it mean to make peace? And hopefully you'll see in my hopefully new book that I'm going to be publishing, God willing, in 3 years. It's like J.R. Tolkien's story regarding like Norse and English mythology and history. Well, I love the native culture so much, I'm writing one about the ancient natives, the land of Adon. So hopefully you enjoy that book. Hopefully you enjoy this video, and keep discovering places like this. It makes life exciting. It makes you really think, you know, like even just digging in the woods, scavenging by the creeks. You know, if you want to find where people go, especially in ancient times, you follow the creek beds. If you follow the creek beds, you get to the highway. The highway is the river. And the highway outside of the river is where the buffalo tramp down all the grass. And you can follow to, you know, the Black Hills. Like you get on the buffalo train. You follow the buffalo, you find your other native relatives. Or if you follow the river, you find them as well. So from the borderlands, like where the warriors would gather, like Hastings and St. Paul here, like the very edge of their colony, these mounds are probably what they defended, and like straight up, like kept the land between here